My name is Billy Kirkton. I grew up in Kankakee, Illinois. I grew up in a fairly politically conscious home. My mom is pretty apolitical, but my dad more than made up for that. He's extremely conservative and very outspoken. And I guess I don't know exactly when or how, but at some point I guess there just felt like something inherently wrong with the rhetoric that I was bombarded with, and I feel like my attraction to progressive values was born very early on, but I didn't have an outlet for it most of my life until I moved down here for college in 2011, and I think that's really what kind of and getting hooked up with the right people is really what kind of sparked my interest in a much bigger way. Yeah, the first time was it was early 2011, I believe, when the union strikes were happening in Madison, Wisconsin. And I actually went up with my cousin Stefan and a few others, and we spent a couple of days up there. And that's really the first time I really took part in a movement that the first time that I really felt like the power of that many people in one space at one time, and it was super exciting to me, and yeah, really invigorating. But it was transformative in the way that I saw what I could do in the world, and I realized that there could be an outlet for this, and that people were taking action, and that people were engaged, and yeah, that I could be doing a lot more myself. And I realized, kind of in my later teen years, that my dad was kind of the black sheep of his family, in that he was kind of an outlier, and I kind of found myself commiserating with other people within the family, Stefan definitely being one of them, who introduced me to the idea of social anarchism first, he had already lived down here in Bloomington, and was telling me about the formation of the free school, which I thought was awesome, and I immediately wanted to be down here to be a part of it. So yeah, he definitely had a big influence. Yeah, it was a very interesting family dynamic. And yeah, my relationship with my dad has always been very strained, and I've always tended towards other folks in my family much more. I didn't spend a lot of time in college. I can't tell you the last time I picked up a book. But yeah, I found a lot of solace in family and friends, and just kind of trying to hash out these issues for myself, which is an ongoing process. I remembered in middle school, actually, I was fairly apolitical at that point. But I don't even remember how, but I stumbled upon a lot of the movement artwork that came out of the student and labor movements in France in 1968. This amazing creative output, and just this beautiful artwork, created communally. And like I said, I don't remember how I even stumbled upon that, but I became so infatuated with it, and loved it so much and loved the idea of this community creating this stuff, that I think that actually left a really big impact, especially considering, that I'm an artist now as well. But I go back to the artwork of that time period a lot, actually, and there's something about it that I'm always striving towards, actually.
My name is Dawn Dannenbring. I was raised by a very principled mother, and the environment, I'm organizing on the environment now, and I did a lot of organizing before we got involved in environmental organizing, and I really feel like it's coming to a zenith now because I'm super passionate about the environment. My mom had me read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring when I was about 10 or 11 years old. So, I was raised on the fact that we have this one planet and we need to take care of it. It's not only my vocation, it's also my avocation. I read about this stuff when I'm not at work. If something happened and I was no longer working for IPA, I would still want to be involved in the work that IPA was doing. So it gets in your blood, and it's a good thing. It's not something to shy away from. If we really want to make a difference in the world that we live in, we need more people that are willing to step up, not less. Well, before IPA was IPA, it was a group called the Central Illinois Organizing Project, and it was founded by my husband, and so I volunteered for the organization, and I volunteered for about 12 years before I came on as staff. I'm the lead organizer, particularly on environmental issues, but nobody does just one thing here. So I also organize on payday lending. Right now, that's another one of our active campaigns. In the past, I've also organized on foreclosures and living wage. Whatever campaign is going at the time, sometimes there's a need for all hands to be on deck. So, yeah. But I took the lead on the environmental organizing, which started in about 3 years ago, when it looked like fracking was coming to the state of Illinois. And one of our leaders brought the issue to us and said, it looks like Illinois might be considering fracking, and I think that's something we should be organizing on. So we did a listening campaign and went out to our member groups and the community and asked people if they knew what fracking was, and if they did, how they felt about it, and whether or not we should be organizing on it. And if we were organizing on it, were they willing to work on it? And the very first public meeting we had, 175 people turned out. So, and that was just here in Bloomington. That was a local meeting. So it seemed like it was an issue that touched some raw nerves. So the first action that I ever went on was on a predatory lender, and it was down in Springfield. And I was so nervous when the police came, because the institution called the police, that I thought I was going to throw up. I mean, I was really scared. And our director had reassured us that nobody would get arrested, make sure that, that there would be a police liaison, and that person would work with the police, and that if the police said, now it is time for you to go, we always obey the law. So, but I was still nervous. But I would say I have always been involved. So I was involved in political campaigns before I was able to vote. I would go out with my older siblings and canvass neighborhoods and get out the vote. And as I mentioned earlier, the environment has always been a huge issue for me, so I was involved in certain issues. I would say my understanding of injustice has broadened as a result of being involved in community organizing.
Okay, my name is Kelby. I grew up in a small town in Leroy, Illinois. Kind of before college, I had kind of more of an open mind about most political things. But what really got me was Richard Sullivan's class in sociology, the 106 class. It was a big lecture hall, and he threw out great ideas, and then I was right up there trying to challenge him. And most classes I didn't really speak much, but his I was just always trying to stay after class and figure out where this guy's coming from with things. I hadn't heard his ideas before. And then through his class, I got turned on a little bit to the idea of socialism, which I quickly went from there to just anarchism, and kind of more of the libertarian side of anarchism. And started reading Murray Bookchin and other authors about anarchism. And then out of nowhere there was this flyer that my roommate had showed me that was for a anarchism documentary that was being shown at the college. And so I went there and met some really nice people who were involved in a Common Action Free School. And then from there I started going to all the meetings and was a participant until it went away for a while. Also, I kind of did more of nonprofit work simultaneously while going to college. And so a lot of that work was trying to empower people in low-income communities. So I got to experience the day-to-day experience that they go through, because I worked at a convenience store in kind of the the lower-income area of town in Bloomington, which is nothing. It's not bad, but there was a lot of people who came in day out with a lot of struggle, and then all of a sudden this thing called Occupy happened, and I think I heard about it through a friend asking if I had seen the first march they did in New York, and then I YouTubed that later, and knew a couple people from the Common Action Free School, and through the colleges, and just IPA actually. Basically, that people were all in the right place at the right time, and we ended up creating an Occupy movement here in Bloomington. And it started in one of our friends' living rooms, and then we put out the Facebook, social media, all of that in town. And then next week we had a circle of about like 100 people all showing up to try to join the Occupy movement and start it and work together. Like I said, I came from a really small town. I wasn't into sports, wasn't into cars, and just, a lot of things everybody else was into. But I did have a computer at a young age, and I was on Napster when that was still Napster and free. And I got into message boards and instant messaging at a very, very young age. And through that, I kind of found people who I really enjoyed spending time talking to, and then they turned me on to a couple of, I'd say, influential books, more or less, and just music in general. And I think just the media itself pushed my ideas of what life is, especially when all around me was just a small town feel. And then one of the things that I was told to read was a book called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And I think that was probably one of the first books I read that really opened up my, my world to outside of Leroy, Illinois. So, yeah, I had a close friend that told me to read it, and they repeatedly told me, like, it's gonna sound really stupid at first, and you're not gonna want to read it, but just trust me, get through it, and we'll talk about it, and that type of deal. And it was about a guy who can telepathically talk to a gorilla behind a cage. Again, it's a very strange intro, but it's actually a fairly influential book, and I think a lot of schools that have a higher education, like a lot of Montessori schools, they actually have this book in their curriculum, and it's caught a lot of attention in the past 10 years, I think. There's actually a Pearl Jam album dedicated to it. But anyway, it's, yeah, I think, again, it was that just the pressure of a friend, someone close to that I talked to every night, and just saying, like, this is a really good book. And I was like, okay, I read it, and then the ideas that I latched on was partially, I mean, it was partially the sense that we don't really have control, but there are things that we can be doing. As opposed to before, I just felt like that we didn't have control and there's nothing we could do. So, I mean, just to sum that up, I guess.
Yeah.
My name is Barbara Heil. I grew up in a very small town, which affected a lot of the things that we'll talk about probably today, in California, and went to college in California I was in school in the 50s, and then college from 64 to 66, graduated in 64. So 60 to 64. So that's a long time ago, but it's also the coming of being able to have some models of activism in my life. I had feelings about what was fair growing up in the 50s. I just have this feeling that lots of times even little kids know what's fair and not fair. And I remember thinking that if some people had a lot more than other people had, then why wouldn't they share? And so it sort of comes along with growing up in a small town where people did look out after each other. We really supported one another in lots of ways. But that model for behavior, that norm for behavior, was to fit in and do things that would be amenable and conform to the times. And so that really was hammered home I had a mother that said, just don't make waves. And it was a small town, so if you did get on the outs, there was no place to go. It was 135 miles from the nearest city. And so there was a sense in that community that you had this community to live in. I had friends who were active. My current husband is very active, and together we got involved in Illinois People's Action, and that really is where I came home to it. Always belonged to a liberal church here in Bloomington Normal, and they were concerned about justice issues, and I participated in those efforts. It really started with the very beginning of the fracking, anti-fracking movement here in town that IPA really started and has spearheaded all along. And so it was going down to Springfield, it was learning about fracking, it was putting on, helping to organize get-togethers in the community and in different churches where people could come and learn about what fracking could do to the environment, to our water, our air, land. And so I actually had no idea that participating in these actions would affect my internal kind of decision-making and set of feelings. But I've gotten a lot more confidence on standing up. So that old tendency to stay with the crowd, the 1950s conformity message, has been slowly pushed down. It's never gone, but it's been overpowered in a sense by the positive effects of being active and knowledgeable. The kind of link between discovering my own history, biologic and physiological history, or trying to make sense of it. So I have heavy metals from all kinds of exposure, including I have uranium. We lived only 100 miles as the crow flies from the Nevada test site, nuclear test site, where they detonated over 666 atomic bombs, most of it underground. They did the first ones above ground, and people would come to Las Vegas to see the mushroom clouds. But because we were on the west side of the mountains, there were two small mountain ranges between us and the test site. We were on the California side. We didn't think we were going to be affected by the radioactive fallout, and the people who lived east of the site were devastated with the fallout from, and had cancers just rampant in those communities and families. But come to find out, I have carrying quite a bit of uranium. And the IPA action has come together to make me a person willing to speak out about it.
Lewis, spelled L-O-U-I-S, Gosland, G-O-S-E-L-A-N-D, and originally from Kansas. Have been involved with community organizing for about 12 years, professionally organizer for about 10, and have worked on everything ranging from neighborhood issues to electoral politics. Have worked on a number of issues ranging from child welfare reform to neighborhood redevelopment, voter rights, as well as predatory lending, and I've worked in collaboration with organizers and groups that work on immigrant rights. So yeah, lots of experience in community organizing. First got introduced to organizing, well, I first started an activist circle with a peace and social justice group called the South Central Kansas Peace and Social Justice Center, and at that time, it was about my sophomore year of high school. I was an outspoken student and very much opposed to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and had been brought into the activist circle in Wichita through some teachers who shared my views on what was going on in the Middle East. And the first thing that I got involved with was counter-recruitment. So in attending a low-income school where about 2/3 of the students were on some kind of economic assistance, myself included, recognized that the kind of pressures that we faced around joining the military were probably greater than some of our peers who attended other schools, more affluent schools. I'd been to other schools for different events and had known people who went to other schools throughout the city, and it seemed like our school in particular had a sort of an unusually sort of regular presence from the military recruiters, and I think that for them, I mean, we were an easy target. Our parents couldn't afford to put us through college. A lot of kids didn't even know if they wanted to go to college, but also didn't have any sense of what they wanted to do for a career. And so when you've got someone telling you that, not only can you get money for school, but you can also get a steady paycheck, healthcare, and all kinds of benefits if you join the military, well, for a poor kid, that's pretty enticing. And then there's all the sort of wartime patriotism that, makes kids think that this is the heroic and noble thing to do. But what the recruiters weren't telling kids is that, a majority of people coming out of the military don't leave with a degree. That the overwhelming majority of homeless people on the streets are former servicemen and women. And so this idea that you could sign up, get some kind of dream job, land an education, and get a steady paycheck wasn't the reality. However, if you were interested in military service, well, naturally that's the place for you. But when I talked to kids who were considering it, that usually wasn't their first sort of priority or objective in considering enlistment. And so some of what we did initially was forcing the school district into compliance with the No Child Left Behind Act, and this provision that required schools to disclose enrollment information to military recruiters, but also required that the schools make parents and students aware and provide them a way to opt out. And that's something that they weren't doing, which put their federal funding in jeopardy. So it was a fairly quick win on that one, and the result was that a lot of parents, once they found out that their kids' information was being offered to the military, did decide to opt out across the district. Another thing that we did was, did a campaign to force school administrators to make it clear to students that the ASVAB test, the vocational test that the military gives high schools, that it wasn't required and that it can be used for military recruitment purposes, because what we were seeing was that, if these kids weren't vulnerable enough, with the information that the ASVAB would give the recruiters, they could, basically get to know what you're good at, what you're interested in, and make a really compelling pitch when they get you on the phone or visit you at your doorstep to try to get you to enlist. And so those were two of the first things that I got involved with, as ways to kind of get some experience and be able to kind of act on my beliefs. I feel like the idea that things work out for everyone was not really an option for me in terms of my understanding or worldview from early on. When I was born, my dad was in prison. My mom is first generation American, whose father, when he came over here from Germany, faced all kinds of hell from, just being an outsider. And so in my family, there were problems, struggles with mental illness, poverty, addiction, and this idea that, if you do the right things and if you're a good person, everything's going to work out for you, just wasn't the case, because, these were the people that loved me. And so even though they had faults, even though there are things that they're struggling with, they're still good people, and it was pretty clear to me early on that the people that are around me were good. They were loving, they were caring people, but still somehow it didn't shake out for them. And so to me that felt wrong. When you hear this sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, sort of American dream, land of prosperity, that kind of thing, but then the people around you, somehow can't seem to make that work, you kind of question whether or not you're being fed a line. And while there were things that I probably shouldn't have been exposed to as a young person, I feel like the benefit was that it gave me a better understanding of the world I was living in, not just the world that you're taught at school or see on TV, but actually the reality of what life is like. And so in addition to the hardships and things that my family was going through, we had a very open family, very open to sharing things about personal struggles, but then also just voicing opinions on world events. And so as a young person, I heard about, my mom talked openly about struggling with debt. What's debt? That kind of question comes up, and rather than like, hey, this is grown-up talk, that was a conversation that I was pulled into. Or the things that my mom was a part of when she did have a good job for a stretch there, where she was a member of a union. So what's a union? What's a strike? Like, what's that t-shirt mean that you're wearing all the time? Like, what are these events that we keep going to? And so, like, through her involvement in that, I got to know a little bit more. My grandmother, who was, as a kid, put through the adoption system and eventually was put in a really good family, was also in her adulthood a strong pro-choice advocate, and talked to me about how difficult foster care and adoption can be, and how that's not necessarily the easy fix to a complicated problem around women's choice, or a woman tried to choose. And so so she talked about women's issues very openly, and we would go to the events and things like that. So so I think it was like a mixture of firsthand experience with the folks around me, but then also just sort of mentorship and guidance, and being welcomed into adult conversations from a really early age, and brought into sort of a bigger kind of worldview of what's really going on. But I think as a young person, the thing that I can remember that first stood out was in '99 and 2000. I was like 6th grade, 7th grade, and there were probably three significant things that happened in that span of time that really kind of forced me to start to develop my own sort of worldview. One experience I remember is sitting and watching the nighttime news with my my stepdad's family, and I kind of quickly understood how hateful conservative-minded people could be when we're watching coverage of the WTO riots and we're seeing like kids who are peacefully demonstrating and sitting, like being provoked and pepper sprayed by cops, and hearing this guy, kind of make a joke out of it, and me looking at it as a kid just like, well, that looks like it's really shitty, like that looks like it really hurts, like how can you sit here and laugh at that? That's one thing that stood out. Another was in middle school around that same time we were doing mock elections. It was a presidential election here for the 2000 elections, and I got involved. I think I was running the Green Party campaign in the middle school mock election, and so I was actually paying attention like what was going on. And then Florida comes about, and then George W. Bush was elected, but then he lost the popular vote, and to me that just kind of like shattered any kind of sort of like ideal around like, oh, this is democracy. You vote for who you want, and if your candidate wins, then he's elected. That's not necessarily so. And then I think after Columbine, I remember like that week as it played out, and showing up to school, being treated like a kid, and almost overnight coming in and, well, now we are getting our backpack searched. Now we can't go to our locker after lunch. Now we are basically living in a very rigid institution. And I saw how like a crisis that occurs even hundreds of miles away can be used in a way that almost immediately forces some kind of social control almost overnight. And so those were three things that I first really remember paying attention to and feeling like, damn, like we don't really, all too often, like our ability to decide how we conduct ourselves, our ability to decide how we interact with each other, how we attend school, how we vote for our leaders are not really decided by us, and that the power, the scales of power are kind of tipped in one direction, and we kind of get the short end of things. And so I think those were really transformational sort of like moments that stick out to me, where I, as a young person, first started kind of thinking about where I fit in all of that and what my role should be. The thing that pushed me into it was just being pissed. Like, I was mad as hell. And I think that a lot of people process that anger in different ways. Some people turn it against others. Some people turn it against themselves, make harmful decisions. And I think that there were a lot of things that were in place where I could have made that same decision. But I think it's like a person-to-person connection where people actually welcome that sort of righteous anger and support you in that, and politicize those moments to get you to understand that, that while you may have a fucked up situation in your household, it's not just your household, and there's a lot of things that put you in that fucked up situation. So while you may be able to target your anger and inflict some kind of damage or retaliate in your own home, life goes on, and nothing really changes in that. From about towards the late 90s, like my dad's addiction to cocaine had gotten really intense. My mom had to quit her union job that she held for a good while and go and take care of my grandma, who couldn't get the kind of health care that she needed. So my mom went there to help out, but this was in a rural Kansas community with very little job opportunity, so she ended up taking like 3 minimum wage jobs and just getting shit on. I ended up staying with an aunt for a while, and it's when I came back and saw how much things had gotten worse, that that amount of anger was just pretty obvious. And so the thing that really helped me out was like entering a school environment where I had teachers who understood the kind of pain and struggle that their students were going through, and really welcomed kids to be open about their experience, but also to welcome a critical view of what was going on in the curriculum, but also like challenged us to think about what was going on in the world. And I had two teachers in particular that encouraged that kind of discussion in their classroom, and it was something that I was more than happy and very eager to participate in. It gave me an outlet, it gave me a chance to vent, and lucky for me, like, these two individuals took it upon themselves to like bring me deeper into that conversation, introduce me to young people and adults who are actually acting on that. And so I think, you know, I think values are one thing. I think that anger is a big motivator and something that can move people to take action, whether it's guided and directed and strategic, or whether it's harmful and, you know, misguided. And I think that the difference between taking harmful action and, you know, being just completely burnt by that anger is having a supportive community around you that can back you in that can tell you that you're not wrong for feeling the way that you do, that things are fucked up, that they're with you, that there's things that, you know, they're willing to do with you in order to try to change the situation that you and a lot of other people find yourselves in. So I mean, there are members of my family that were always willing to have those conversations. Both of my parents, my grandma, my aunt. But in terms of like someone from outside of my family that could bring me into a community that was committed to that, I had a history teacher named Beverly Lucas, and a chemistry teacher who's a Mennonite pacifist named Marcus Loganville, who both were connected to local organizing and activist work that were really the first people who brought me in. Once I got into the organizing scene in Wichita, there's a man named Horace Santry, who was the director of the Peace Center, who, you know, acted as a mentor and role model for me and gave me a lot of his time and a lot of his encouragement. There's a woman named Janice Bradley, who was a teacher at another high school, who just jumped in head first on this work against military recruiters. There are a lot of people who brought me in, and the first time that I really recognized the power of those kinds of relationships is when a right-wing Christian fundamentalist church was touring high schools and universities and basically pushing hate speech, calling kids all kinds of terrible things, and spreading all kinds of homophobic, Islamophobic, you know, anti-choice material, but basically doing picket lines and harassing students. And they came to the school that I was at. One of my other teachers, who was a journalism teacher, gave me access to the printer to start printing off flyers, try to organize a counter-protest, because it had pissed me off. It pissed off a lot of other students. You could hear it in the halls. Kids were ready to do something. And because of the relationships I knew I had, and because of the confidence that was, you know, that was built in me from the mentors that I had developed over a year leading up to that point, I felt like I could actually, you know, take this moment, reach out to all of these people who were feeling that anger, and point them in a direction where they could release that in a constructive way. So we organized a protest at the church that was hosting them, shut down their Sunday service, and basically sent a strong message that we didn't want them in our schools. But it was reaching to Horace Santry at the Peace Center, to Mr. Loganville, to Ms. Lucas, to all of these people that I had talked to, and they reached out to the people that they knew. And it was, I think that was the first moment that I recognized that those supportive relationships can really pull through and back you when you need them the most. And so, you know, we had like 200 people show up. Each of these adults in my life reached out to people that they knew. We had people from the Muslim community, the gay community. We had people from, you know, teachers unions, and everybody who showed up there together. And it was at that moment that, with all of the attention that was generated towards that, that I came across my first community organizer, a guy named Jake Lowen, who was working with a group called Hope Street Youth Development, who saw my name in the paper and reached out. And that took it to another level where I recognized that those kinds of relationships and those kinds of issues can actually lead to not just building a flash in the pan sort of demonstration of power through protest, but also, can be held together and to be organized in a way where you're now building a power organization, and that's the type of organizing that I've been doing since then.